I stood in Terminal 4 at Los Angeles International Airport, holding my boarding pass for a flight that had already departed, while my family sat comfortably on their plane to Hawaii without me. They thought it would be hilarious to give me the wrong departure time and watch me scramble to catch up. What they did not know was that abandoning me at that airport would become the best thing that ever happened to me. My name is Sofia Martinez, and this is the story of how my family's cruelest joke became the foundation for the most extraordinary chapter of my life. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. At 28 years old, I had become a professional disappointment to my family, at least according to their carefully constructed narrative. While my younger sister Isabella was building her influencer empire with perfectly curated lifestyle content, and my older brother Diego was climbing the corporate ladder at our father's construction company, I was the one who had chosen the impractical path of becoming a social worker. The Martinez family dynamics were carved in stone decades before I was born. My father, Roberto Martinez, had built his construction business from nothing after immigrating from El Salvador. His success had afforded our family a comfortable middle-class life in Riverside, California, complete with a 4-bedroom house, annual vacations, and the unshakable belief that financial achievement was the only measurement that mattered. My mother, Carmen, had embraced her role as the family's social coordinator and appearance manager. She organized every gathering, managed every relationship, and ensured that the Martinez family always presented the perfect image to our extended family and community. In her world, success was measured by what others could see, not by the satisfaction you felt in your daily work. Diego had fallen perfectly into their expectations. After graduating from business school, he had joined our father's company and was being groomed to take over operations. His marriage to Patricia, a dental hygienist from a good family, had produced 2 beautiful children who were already being showcased on social media as the next generation of Martinez excellence. Isabella had found her own version of family-approved success through her lifestyle blog and Instagram presence. She had somehow managed to monetize her natural beauty and fashion sense into a 6-figure income, proving that even unconventional paths could generate the financial validation our parents craved. Her engagement to Marcus, a real estate developer, was being planned as the social event of the year. Then there was me, Sophia, the middle child who had stubbornly chosen to work with homeless families through the Department of Social Services. My master's degree in social work had been met with polite congratulations and private disappointment. My salary, barely enough to cover my studio apartment in Los Angeles, was a constant source of concern and subtle criticism from my family. The underlying tension had been building for years, but it reached a breaking point during what was supposed to be a celebration. Isabella's engagement party had been scheduled for a weekend in February, and the entire extended family had been invited to witness this milestone. The party itself had been lovely, held at an upscale venue in Orange County with professional photography and catered food that cost more than I made in a month. During the reception, I had found myself standing alone near the gift table while my cousins and aunts gathered around Isabella, asking about wedding plans and cooing over her engagement ring. The isolation was familiar, but it stung more than usual in such a celebratory setting. My Aunt Rosa had approached me with what I now recognize as well-intentioned but deeply hurtful concern. "Nisha," she had said, "when are you going to find someone nice and settle down? Your sister is younger than you, and look how happy she is." Before I could respond, my mother had appeared beside us, wearing her practiced smile. "Sophia is very focused on her work," she had said, the words carrying an edge of apology. "She helps people who cannot help themselves." The conversation had continued around me rather than with me, as though I was a problem to be solved rather than a person with my own dreams and accomplishments. When I tried to mention the recent success I had achieved in helping a family transition from homelessness to stable housing, the topic was quickly changed to wedding planning details. That evening, I had retreated to my childhood bedroom, staring at the walls covered with awards from high school academic achievements and college honors. None of those accomplishments seemed to matter now that I was not following the predetermined path to family-approved success. The Hawaii trip invitation had come 2 weeks later, presented as a family bonding opportunity. Isabella had suggested that we all take a vacation together before her wedding preparations became too overwhelming. The destination was a resort in Maui that would cost me nearly a month's salary, but family pressure and my own desperate desire to feel included had convinced me to charge it to my credit card. The planning had been handled entirely by Isabella and my mother, with input from Diego about flights and logistics. I had been grateful not to manage the details, especially since my work schedule was particularly demanding during that period. Several of my clients were facing housing crises, and I was spending extra hours advocating for them with landlords and government agencies. When my mother had called to finalize my flight information, I had been in the middle of a particularly difficult case involving a single mother with 3 children, who was being evicted. I had quickly provided my travel dates and asked her to book whatever worked best for the family schedule. "We found a great deal on flights," she had told me. "Everyone will be leaving around the same time, so we can all travel together. Just meet us at LAX Terminal 4 at 9 in the morning on Friday." I had written down the information and tucked it into my planner, feeling a rare sense of anticipation about spending quality time with my family outside the usual dynamics of family gatherings and holiday stress. The week before the trip had been particularly challenging at work. One of my teenage clients had been aging out of the foster care system without adequate support, and I had been working with community organizations to establish a transitional housing arrangement. The case had required extensive documentation and coordination with multiple agencies, keeping me at the office until nearly midnight, several days in a row. By Thursday evening I was exhausted but satisfied with the progress we had made. The teenager would have a safe place to live and access to job training programs. As I packed my suitcase that night, I felt grateful for the upcoming break and excited about the possibility of rebuilding connections with my family. I had arrived at LAX Terminal 4 at 8:30 on Friday morning, giving myself extra time to locate my family and check in together. The terminal was bustling with travelers, and I had found myself scanning the crowds for familiar faces, while reviewing the flight information my mother had given me. By 9:15 I was concerned that I had somehow missed them in the crowd. I checked my phone for messages and called my mother's number, but the call went directly to voicemail. Assuming they were dealing with traffic or parking issues, I decided to proceed to the check-in counter to verify my flight details. The airline representative had looked at my confirmation number with confusion before checking her computer system again. "I'm sorry, but this flight departed at 7:30 this morning," she had informed me. "The departure time you have written down is for the arrival time in Honolulu." My stomach had dropped as the realization began to settle in. I had checked and double-checked the information my mother had given me, and I was certain she had said 9 o'clock departure, but the evidence on the computer screen was undeniable. "Is there another flight to Maui today?" I had asked, hoping to salvage the situation. "The next available flight with seats is on Sunday," she had replied, "and it would be significantly more expensive than your original booking." I had stood there processing this information, trying to understand how such a fundamental mistake could have occurred. The Sunday flight would cost nearly $2,000, money I simply did not have available. More importantly, the family vacation was scheduled to end on Tuesday, meaning I would miss most of the trip entirely. As I walked away from the check-in counter, my phone had buzzed with a text message from Isabella. "Hope you figured out the flight situation. We're boarding. See you when you get there." The casual tone of the message had been like a physical blow. They had all known that I had the wrong departure time, and none of them had bothered to correct the information or ensure that I would be able to travel with them. I had immediately called Isabella's number, but like my mother's phone, it had gone directly to voicemail. The same result occurred when I tried to reach Diego and my father. They had all silenced their phones, presumably for the flight, but the timing felt deliberate and cruel. Sitting in an uncomfortable plastic chair near the departure gate, I had tried to piece together how this situation had developed. Had my mother genuinely made a mistake when she gave me the flight information, or had this been an intentional set? The text message from Isabella suggested that they had anticipated I would have problems, which implied foreknowledge of the incorrect information. The more I considered the evidence, the more convinced I became that this had been a deliberate act. My family had planned a vacation without me, but rather than simply excluding me from the invitation, they had created an elaborate scenario designed to make me feel foolish and incompetent. The realization had been devastating, but it had also been clarifying. This was not the first time I had been marginalized or excluded from family activities, but it was the most blatant and unmistakable example of their disregard for my feelings and presence. I had spent the next hour sitting in that airport chair, processing emotions that ranged from hurt to anger to something approaching relief. The hurt was obvious and immediate, discovering that your family had deliberately sabotaged your vacation plans was painful regardless of the underlying relationship dynamic. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The anger had taken longer to develop, but it had been more energizing than the hurt. I was angry at myself for being naive enough to believe that this trip would be different from other family interactions. I was angry at them for their cruelty, but I was also angry at the years I had spent trying to earn acceptance from people who had apparently never intended to provide it. The relief had been the most surprising emotion, and also the most significant. Sitting alone in that airport, I had realized that I was free from the obligation to spend a week pretending that our family relationships were healthier than they actually were. I was free from the financial burden of a vacation I could not afford. Most importantly, I was free from the illusion that my family's approval was necessary for my happiness or success. By noon, I had made several important decisions. I would not attempt to follow them to Hawaii, even if I could afford the Sunday flight. I would not spend my energy trying to maintain relationships with people who clearly did not value my presence, and I would use this unexpected freedom to focus on the work and relationships that actually brought meaning to my life. The first decision I made was to drive directly from LAX to my office. I had vacation days scheduled, but several of my clients were facing urgent situations that could benefit from immediate attention. Rather than sitting at home feeling sorry for myself, I could use this time productively. When I arrived at the Department of Social Services building, my supervisor Maria Elena had been surprised to see me. "Sophia, aren't you supposed to be on a plane to Hawaii right now?" she had asked. "Change of plans," I had replied, not ready to explain the full situation. I thought I could use the time to catch up on some cases that need extra attention. Maria Elena had studied my expression with the kind of perceptive concern that made her an excellent supervisor. "If you want to talk about whatever happened, my door is always open," she had said. "But I'm glad you're here. The Ramirez family case has developed some complications that could really use your expertise." The Ramirez family consisted of a mother, Elena, and her 2 young daughters, who had been living in their car for 3 weeks after losing their apartment. The father had been deported 6 months earlier, leaving Elena to support the family on her income from cleaning houses. When she had been injured in a car accident and unable to work for several weeks, they had fallen behind on rent and been evicted. I had been working with Elena for 2 months, helping her navigate the complex systems required to access emergency housing assistance and apply for long-term housing support. The case was complicated by her immigration status and limited English proficiency, requiring coordination with legal aid organizations and bilingual services. The recent complication Maria Elena had mentioned involved the school district's threat to report the family to Child Protective Services if the children continued to miss school due to their housing instability. Elena was terrified that her daughters would be removed from her care, and she had been considering returning to El Salvador despite the danger that would pose to her family's safety. Spending my vacation days working on this case had given me a sense of purpose that I had never felt during family vacation. Each small success, finding a temporary housing placement, connecting Elena with a job training program, advocating with the school district for patience and support, had felt more meaningful than any Instagram-worthy vacation photo. By the end of that first day, I had managed to secure emergency housing for the Ramirez family and connect Elena with a legal aid attorney who could help her apply for a visa that would provide more stability. The gratitude in Elena's eyes when I called to give her the news had been worth more than any family acceptance I had ever received. That evening, I had returned to my studio apartment with a new perspective on my life and priorities. The apartment was small and modest, but it was mine. The furniture was secondhand and mismatched, but it was comfortable and functional. The view from my window showed the busy street below, rather than an ocean sunset, but it represented independence and authenticity. For the first time in years, I had felt completely content with my choices and circumstances. The family's abandonment had been cruel, but it had also been liberating. I was no longer obligated to seek their approval or modify my behavior to earn their acceptance. Over the weekend, I had received several text messages from various family members. Isabella had sent photos from the resort with captions like "Wish you were here" and "Missing our family photography." The messages had clearly been sent for show, creating evidence that they had thought of me during the trip. Diego had sent a single message saying, "Sorry about the flight confusion, hope you can join us for future trips." The message had been typical of his approach to family conflicts, acknowledging the problem without taking responsibility or offering any meaningful support. My parents had remained silent, which was also typical of their conflict avoidance strategy. They preferred to let time pass until everyone was expected to pretend that nothing had happened. I had not responded to any of the messages. For the first time in my adult life, I had felt no obligation to make other people comfortable with their own behavior toward me. When my family had returned from Hawaii the following Tuesday, my mother had called to suggest that we all get together for dinner to catch up and share stories from the trip. The invitation had been extended, as though I had simply chosen not to participate, rather than being deliberately excluded. "I appreciate the invitation," I had told her, "but I'm not available for family dinners right now. I'm focusing on my work and other priorities." The conversation had been brief and strained, ending with my mother's promise to call again soon when things settle down. I had known that this was her way of avoiding the underlying conflict while maintaining the appearance of family concern. That phone call had marked the beginning of a new chapter in my relationship with my family, characterized by polite distance rather than desperate attempts to belong. I had realized that I could love them without needing their approval, and I could maintain family connections without sacrificing my own emotional well-being. The most important realization, however, had been that I was already living the life I wanted. My work was challenging and meaningful. My colleagues respected my expertise and dedication. My clients trusted me with their most vulnerable moments and celebrated their successes with me. The family's judgment of my choices had been based on external measures like salary and social status, but my satisfaction came from internal measures like purpose and impact. Their abandonment at the airport had forced me to confront the difference between these two value systems and choose the one that aligned with my authentic self. As I sat in my apartment that Tuesday evening, listening to the sounds of the city outside my window, I had felt a sense of anticipation about the future that I had not experienced in years. I was free to build the life I wanted, without considering whether it would earn family approval. I was free to pursue relationships with people who valued my presence rather than tolerated it. The airport abandonment had been intended as a cruel joke, a demonstration of my dispensability within the family structure. Instead, it had become the catalyst for my emotional independence and the beginning of a journey toward authentic success. Little did I know that this newfound freedom would soon lead to opportunities and relationships that would transform not only my own life but also the lives of countless others who, like me, had been underestimated and undervalued by the people who should have supported them. The family thought it would be funny to leave me stranded at LAX, but what they actually did was set me free to discover who I was capable of becoming without their limitations and expectations weighing me down. The woman who walked out of that airport was different from the one who had walked in, and that difference would soon become the foundation for something extraordinary. The weeks following the airport incident revealed the true depth of my family's coordinated deception, and with each new discovery, the foundation of everything I had believed about my relationships began to crumble beneath my feet. What I had initially assumed was a cruel prank or miscommunication evolved into something far more calculated and devastating than I could have imagined. The first crack in my understanding came 3 days after their return from Hawaii, when my cousin Andrea called me unexpectedly. Andrea had always been the family member I felt closest to, sharing my interest in social justice and maintaining a relationship that existed somewhat outside the immediate family dynamics. Her voice carried an unusual tension when she asked if we could meet for coffee. We met at a small cafe in downtown Los Angeles, far from our usual family gathering places in Riverside. Andrea's discomfort was evident from the moment she sat down, her hands fidgeting with her coffee cup as she struggled to find the words for what she needed to tell me. "Sophia, I need you to know that what happened with the Hawaii trip was not an accident," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I overheard a conversation between your mother and Isabella 2 weeks before the trip. They planned it deliberately." The confirmation of my suspicions hit me like a physical blow, even though I had begun to suspect the truth. Hearing it spoken aloud by someone I trusted transformed my theoretical understanding into unavoidable reality. Andrea continued, explaining that she had been visiting my parents' house to drop off some family photos when she had heard my mother and Isabella discussing the Sophia situation in the kitchen. According to Andrea, they had been laughing about how I would react when I discovered the wrong flight information, speculating about whether I would find a way to follow them to Hawaii, or simply accept being left behind. "Isabella said something about how this would finally show you that you need to get your priorities straight," Andrea reported, her voice filled with disgust. "Your mother said that maybe missing the trip would make you realize that your job is not as important as family time." The twisted logic of their reasoning was almost more painful than the deliberate cruelty. They had convinced themselves that abandoning me was actually a form of tough love, designed to teach me a lesson about prioritizing family relationships over my professional commitment. The fact that my professional commitments involved helping vulnerable families apparently made no difference to their calculation. Andrea's revelation also explained several other details that had puzzled me. The reason everyone's phones had gone directly to voicemail was not coincidental timing for their flight departure. They had all agreed in advance to silence their phones and avoid my calls, ensuring that I would be unable to reach them for clarification or assistance. The casual tone of Isabella's text message from the airport had been equally calculated. By sending a message that suggested mild concern while providing no actual help, she had created plausible deniability while ensuring that I understood they were aware of my situation. "I wanted to warn you beforehand," Andrea admitted, "but I was afraid they would cut me out of family events if they found out I had interfered. I know that sounds cowardly, and I regret not speaking up." I assured Andrea that I understood her position and appreciated her eventual honesty, but her admission highlighted another painful reality about my family dynamic. Even the relatives who sympathized with my situation were unwilling to challenge the established power structure that allowed such behavior to continue unchecked. Over the following days, other pieces of the puzzle began falling into place as I reflected on conversations and interactions from the weeks leading up to the trip. My father's unusual insistence that I take vacation days for the full week rather than just the days we would be traveling now seemed like part of ensuring that I would have no legitimate reason to avoid the trip. My mother's last-minute confirmation of flight details, which I had interpreted as helpful organization, had actually been her final verification that I had the incorrect information. The most painful realization was that this level of coordination required advanced planning and multiple conversations about how to deceive me effectively. This was not a spontaneous decision or a moment of poor judgment. It was a deliberate campaign designed to humiliate me and demonstrate my expendability within the family structure. The psychological impact of understanding the full scope of their deception was profound and multifaceted. The initial hurt and anger I had felt at the airport had been manageable because I could frame them as responses to a specific incident. Discovering that the incident was part of a larger pattern of manipulation and dismissal forced me to reevaluate not only our current relationships, but also years of previous interactions that I had interpreted through a more generous lens. I began reviewing family gatherings, holiday celebrations, and casual conversations with new awareness of the potential for hidden meanings and coordinated messaging. How many times had I been excluded from planning conversations or given incomplete information about family events? How often had my contributions to family discussions been dismissed or redirected in ways that I had attributed to normal family dynamics rather than deliberate marginalization?
The process of re-examining my family relationships through this new lens was exhausting and disorienting. Memories that I had treasured as evidence of family connection began to reveal themselves as moments when I had been tolerated rather than welcomed, managed rather than included. During this period of painful revelation, my work at the Department of Social Services became both a refuge and a source of additional stress. The contrast between the genuine appreciation I received from clients and colleagues and the calculated dismissal I experienced from my family created a cognitive dissonance that was difficult to navigate. My supervisor, Maria Elena, noticed the change in my demeanor during our weekly case review meetings. While my professional performance remained consistently high, she observed that I seemed more withdrawn and less likely to engage in the informal conversations that had previously been a source of mutual support and problem-solving. "Sophia, I want you to know that whatever is happening in your personal life, you have a strong support system here," she told me during one of our individual meetings. "You are valued not just for your professional skills, but for who you are as a person." Sometimes we need to hear that explicitly when other areas of our life are challenging. Her words were particularly meaningful because they addressed exactly the validation I was missing from my family relationship. Maria Elena's recognition of my worth as both a professional and a person stood in stark contrast to my family's apparent inability to see value in either my career choice or my personal character. The clients I worked with also provided inadvertent perspective on my situation. Many of the families I supported were dealing with rejection and abandonment from their own family members, often as a result of circumstances beyond their control. Listening to their stories of resilience and determination helped me understand that family dysfunction was not a reflection of my worth or a prediction of my future possibility. Elena Ramirez, the mother I had been helping secure stable housing, shared her own experience of being rejected by extended family members who disapproved of her decision to remain in the United States after her husband's deportation. "They wanted me to give up and return to El Salvador with my daughters," she explained, "but I knew that staying here was the right choice for my children's future, even if it meant being alone." Her courage in prioritizing her children's welfare over family approval provided a powerful example of how individual conviction could be more valuable than group acceptance. Elena's determination to build a new life, despite family rejection, demonstrated that isolation from unsupportive relatives could actually create space for more authentic relationships and opportunity. As the weeks passed, I began to notice changes in my daily routine and decision-making process that reflected my growing emotional independence from family expectations. For the first time in my adult life, I was making choices based solely on my own preferences and values, rather than considering how those choices would be perceived or judged by family members. The most significant change was in how I spent my free time. Previously, weekends had often been consumed by family obligations, extended family gatherings, and social events that served primarily to maintain family relationships rather than provide personal fulfillment. Without those obligations, I discovered interests and activities that I had neglected or never explored. I began attending community lectures at the local university, focusing on topics related to social policy and urban development. These events connected me with other professionals who shared my passion for social justice and provided intellectual stimulation that had been missing from my social life. I also started volunteering with a nonprofit organization that provided financial literacy education to low-income families. This volunteer work allowed me to use my skills in a different context while building relationships with people who understood the importance of community service and social advocacy. The volunteer work introduced me to Dr. Tricia Nguyen, a clinical psychologist who specialized in family therapy and trauma recovery. Patricia was leading a workshop series on boundary setting for social service professionals, recognizing that our work with vulnerable populations often required us to navigate complex family dynamics both professionally and personally.
During one of Patricia's workshops, she discussed the concept of toxic family loyalty, describing how family members sometimes maintain destructive relationships out of obligation rather than genuine affection or mutual support. Her presentation resonated deeply with my recent experiences and provided a framework for understanding that choosing distance from harmful family members was not a character flaw but a healthy self-preservation strategy. We often assume that blood relationships automatically deserve our loyalty and sacrifice, Patricia explained to the workshop participants. But healthy relationships require mutual respect and support. When family members consistently demonstrate that they do not value our well-being, continuing to prioritize their comfort over our own emotional health becomes a form of self-harm. Her words gave me permission to acknowledge what I had been reluctant to admit, that my family's treatment of me was emotionally harmful and that my attempts to maintain close relationships with them had been damaging my self-esteem and limiting my personal growth. Patricia's workshop also introduced practical strategies for establishing and maintaining boundaries with difficult family members. She emphasized that boundary setting was not about punishment or retaliation, but about creating space for authentic relationships while protecting oneself from ongoing emotional damage. Following Patricia's guidance, I drafted a letter to my parents explaining that I would be taking a break from family gatherings and regular communication while I processed recent events and evaluated our relationships. The letter was respectful but clear about my need for space and my unwillingness to pretend that nothing had happened. Writing the letter was emotionally challenging but also liberating. For the first time, I was articulating my own needs and expectations rather than adapting to theirs. I was claiming the right to feel hurt by their behavior and to respond in a way that prioritized my own emotional well-being. The response to my letter was swift and entirely predictable. My mother called within hours, alternating between tearful apologies and defensive justification. She claimed that the Hawaii incident had been a misunderstanding, that they had all assumed I would figure out the correct flight time, and that my reaction was disproportionate to what had actually occurred. When her attempts at minimizing the situation failed to convince me to resume normal family interactions, she shifted to guilt-based appeals about family unity and the importance of forgiveness. "We are still your family," she reminded me repeatedly. "Family members forgive each other and move forward together." My father's approach was more direct and less emotionally manipulative, but equally dismissive of my concern. During a brief phone conversation, he suggested that I was being overly sensitive and that successful adults did not hold grudges over minor inconveniences. "You are almost 30 years old, Sophia," he told me. "It is time to stop acting like a victim and focus on building a positive future with your family." His characterization of me as a victim was particularly galling because it ignored the agency I was demonstrating by choosing to establish boundaries rather than accept ongoing mistreatment. His suggestion that maturity required accepting their behavior without complaint revealed his fundamental misunderstanding of what healthy adult relationships should look like. Isabella's response was the most revealing and ultimately the most helpful in confirming that my decision to distance myself was appropriate. Rather than offering any acknowledgement of wrongdoing or expression of regret, she sent a text message that said, "You always make everything about you. This is why people do not want to include you in things." Her message inadvertently validated everything I had begun to understand about our family dynamic. She was confirming that my exclusion from family activities was intentional and based on their collective judgment that I was somehow undeserving of inclusion. More importantly, she was demonstrating that they had no intention of changing their behavior or treating me with greater respect in the future. Diego's response was characteristically minimal and non-committal. He sent a brief text message saying that he hoped we could work things out as a family, but offered no specific acknowledgement of what had occurred or any suggestion for how relationships might be improved. The uniformity of their responses confirmed that they had discussed my letter among themselves and coordinated their reaction. Rather than taking the opportunity for genuine reflection or accountability, they had chosen to present a unified front that positioned me as unreasonable and them as victims of my overreaction. This coordinated response actually strengthened my resolve to maintain the boundaries I had established. If they were capable of coordinating their efforts to deceive me about the Hawaii trip, and then coordinating their efforts to dismiss my concerns about that deception, it was clear that they were also capable of treating me with respect if they chose to do so. Their consistent choice to prioritize their own comfort over my feelings revealed the true nature of their regard for me. The following months brought unexpected freedom and opportunity as I redirected the emotional energy I had been investing in family relationships toward professional development and personal growth. Without the drain of constantly trying to earn acceptance from people who had already decided I was unworthy of it, I found myself with increased motivation and focus for pursuing goals that actually mattered to me. At work, I began taking on more complex cases and leadership responsibility. Maria Elena recognized my increased confidence and effectiveness by recommending me for a specialized training program in trauma-informed social work practice. The program was highly competitive and would provide credentials that could lead to promotion opportunities and increased impact in my field. My personal life also began to flourish as I invested in relationships with people who shared my values and appreciated my contribution. The volunteers I worked with at the financial literacy nonprofit became genuine friends who supported my professional goals and enjoyed my company without any agenda or expectation beyond mutual respect and shared interest. One of these new friendships was with Marcus Thompson, a community organizer who worked on housing policy advocacy. Marcus had grown up in foster care and understood from personal experience how family dysfunction could actually become a catalyst for developing independence and resilience. Sometimes the best thing that can happen to someone is realizing that they do not need their family's approval to live a meaningful life, he told me during one of our conversations about family dynamics and personal growth. It is painful at first, but it creates space for authentic relationships and genuine self-discovery. Marcus's perspective helped me understand that my family's rejection, while hurtful, was also an opportunity to discover who I was capable of becoming without their limitations and expectations constraining my choices. Their abandonment at the airport had been intended to diminish me, but it had actually freed me to pursue the life I wanted rather than the life they thought I should want. As this phase of my journey drew to a close, I realized that I had moved through the initial stages of grief and anger into something approaching gratitude. I was grateful for the clarity that their cruelty had provided about our relationship. I was grateful for the opportunity to redirect my energy toward people and pursuits that aligned with my authentic self. Most importantly, I was grateful for the strength I had discovered within myself to choose self-respect over family approval. The woman who had been abandoned at LAX was being replaced by someone who understood her own worth and was unwilling to accept treatment that contradicted that understanding. This transformation was just beginning, but already I could sense that it would lead to opportunities and relationships that would far exceed anything I could have achieved while remaining constrained by family expectations and limitations. The unraveling of my family relationships had been painful, but it had also been necessary. Sometimes dreams become nightmares not because we are weak, but because we have outgrown the limitations that others have tried to impose on us. Sometimes the most loving thing we can do for ourselves is to walk away from people who cannot see our value, creating space for those who can. The months following my decision to establish boundaries with my family brought unexpected consequences that extended far beyond the immediate discomfort of reduced contact with relatives. What I had anticipated as a temporary period of healing and reflection evolved into a comprehensive dismantling of the social and professional networks that had defined my adult life in ways I had never fully recognized or appreciated. The first indication that my family situation would have broader implications came during the annual Department of Social Services employee evaluation period in late spring. My supervisor, Maria Elena, had always provided consistently positive feedback about my performance, and I had no reason to expect this review would differ from previous years. However, the tone of our meeting was noticeably more formal and cautious than our typical interaction. "Sophia, your case outcomes and client feedback continue to be exemplary." Maria Elena began, consulting the formal evaluation documents spread across her desk. "However, there have been some concerns raised about your reliability and long-term commitment to your position here." The criticism was entirely unexpected and seemed disconnected from any observable changes in my work performance or attendance. I had continued to exceed all departmental metrics for case resolution, client satisfaction, and professional development requirements. If anything, my increased focus on work in the absence of family obligations had improved my effectiveness and availability for challenging cases. When I asked for specific examples of reliability concerns, Maria Elena's discomfort became apparent. She explained that the department had received inquiries from community members questioning my emotional stability and professional judgment. These inquiries had not resulted in formal complaints, but they had created enough concern among senior administrators to warrant documentation in my personnel file. The realization that my family had extended their campaign against me into my professional sphere was devastating in ways that their personal rejection had not been. My career represented the one area of my life where I had achieved unambiguous success and recognition based solely on my own efforts and capability. The possibility that they were attempting to undermine my professional reputation felt like a violation of boundaries I had not even realized needed protection. Maria Elena was clearly uncomfortable delivering this information and emphasized that she personally had no concerns about my performance or stability. However, she was obligated to document the inquiries and recommend that I be particularly mindful of maintaining professional boundaries and avoiding any appearance of personal problems affecting my work. The irony of this recommendation was profound, given that my family's interference was the primary factor creating any appearance of personal problem. Their inability to accept my boundary setting had apparently motivated them to seek external validation for their characterization of me as unstable and unreliable. Over the following weeks, I began to identify specific ways that my family was attempting to damage my professional reputation within our community. My mother had apparently contacted several family friends who worked in county government, expressing concern about my mental health and suggesting that I was struggling with depression and making poor decisions about family relationships. These conversations were framed as requests for advice about how to help me, but they served the practical purpose of spreading doubt about my professional competence among people who might influence employment decisions or case assignment. The strategy was sophisticated and difficult to counter directly, since responding to these rumors would require acknowledging them and potentially lending them credibility. My father had taken a more direct approach by contacting Roberto Valdez, a city council member who had previously praised my work on housing policy initiatives. According to Roberto, my father had suggested that my recent behavior indicated I was experiencing personal problems that might affect my judgment on professional matters involving family situations. The most damaging intervention came from Isabella, who had apparently reached out to several local nonprofit organizations where I had been volunteering, expressing concern that I was taking on too many responsibilities while dealing with family stress. Her outreach was positioned as sisterly concern, but it resulted in these organizations questioning whether I was overextending myself and might need to reduce my volunteer commitment. The cumulative effect of these interventions was to create a network of doubt about my stability and judgment among the professional and community connections that represented my primary sources of validation and support outside my family relationship. Even though no single conversation or inquiry was sufficient to damage my reputation significantly, the pattern of concern from multiple sources began to influence how colleagues and community partners interacted with me. The psychological impact of discovering this campaign was more severe than anything I had experienced during the initial family conflict. The airport abandonment and subsequent boundary setting had been painful but ultimately clarifying about the nature of our relationship. This professional sabotage felt like a fundamental attack on my identity and future possibilities. For the first time since the Hawaii incident, I began to question whether my response to their behavior had been appropriate or proportionate. Perhaps their characterization of me as oversensitive and vindictive was accurate. Perhaps maintaining family relationships should have taken priority over my personal feelings about their treatment of me. These doubts were compounded by the practical realities of living in a community where family connections influenced professional opportunities and social acceptance. My decision to distance myself from family relationships had been based on the assumption that I could maintain my career and community standing independently. The discovery that these areas of my life were more interconnected with family relationships than I had realized forced me to confront the possibility that I had miscalculated the costs of establishing boundaries. The isolation that resulted from this realization was more complete and devastating than anything I had experienced previously. At work, I became increasingly careful about casual conversations and social interactions, aware that anything I said might be interpreted through the lens of concern about my emotional stability. With community partners, I found myself second-guessing my contributions to discussions and projects,
worried that my input might be dismissed as evidence of poor judgment. The volunteer work that had become a source of fulfillment and connection also became problematic as I worried that my family's interference might create complications for the organizations I was trying to support. Rather than risk causing problems for programs I cared about, I began to withdraw from leadership roles and reduce my participation in activities that had provided meaning and purpose. This period of professional and social isolation coincided with the beginning of summer, when the contrast between my current situation and my family's continued celebration of their unity became particularly stark. Social media provided constant reminders of family gatherings, celebrations, and shared experiences that emphasized my absence and exclusion. Isabella's engagement party planning dominated family social media, with elaborate posts about venue selection, dress shopping, and celebration planning that highlighted the collaborative nature of family involvement in major life events. The posts were clearly designed to demonstrate how much more enjoyable family activities had become without my presence, suggesting that my absence had improved rather than diminished their relationship. Diego's promotion to a senior management position at our father's company was celebrated with a family dinner that featured prominently in multiple social media accounts. The photos showed everyone laughing and toasting his success, creating a visual narrative about family support and shared achievements that emphasized my exclusion from these important moments. The most painful reminder came when my parents celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary with a renewal ceremony that included extended family and close friends. The event was extensively documented online, with heartfelt tributes to their enduring marriage and the family they had built together. The absence of any reference to me in these tributes felt like a public declaration that I was no longer considered part of their family story. During this period, I also faced practical challenges that I had not anticipated when deciding to establish boundaries with family relationships. The annual renewal of my apartment lease required a significant rent increase that strained my budget considerably. In previous years, my parents had occasionally provided financial assistance for unexpected expenses, but requesting help now was obviously not an option. The financial pressure was compounded by unexpected medical expenses when I required dental work that was not fully covered by my insurance. The combination of increased rent and medical bills created a level of financial stress that I had not experienced since graduate school, and managing these challenges without family support highlighted my isolation in ways that emotional rejection had not. Even more challenging was navigating professional networking events and community functions, where family connections were often topics of casual conversation. Questions about holiday plans, family celebrations, and personal relationships became landmines that required careful navigation to avoid revealing the extent of my family estrangement or appearing antisocial and isolated. The cumulative effect of these challenges was a profound sense of displacement and uncertainty about my future prospects and possibilities. The life I had been building based on professional achievement and community service felt fragile and potentially unsustainable in the face of coordinated family opposition and social isolation. During the lowest point of this period, I began to consider whether relocating to a different city might provide the fresh start necessary to rebuild my life without the constant reminder of family rejection and community judgment. The idea of leaving Los Angeles, where I had established my career and built professional relationships, felt like admitting defeat. But continuing to navigate the current situation seemed equally untenable. The decision point came during a particularly difficult day in late June, when several challenging events converged to create overwhelming stress and self-doubt. A long-term client family that I had been supporting through housing stabilization was facing eviction again due to circumstances beyond their control, requiring me to advocate aggressively with landlords and social service agencies while managing my own professional reputation concerns. During lunch that day, I encountered my Aunt Rosa at a restaurant near my office. The meeting was clearly not coincidental, as she immediately began expressing concern about my health and suggesting that I appeared tired and overwhelmed. Her questions about my work stress and living situation felt like information gathering rather than genuine concern, and I realized that my family was continuing to monitor my situation through extended family connection. That evening, I received an email from the volunteer coordinator at the financial literacy nonprofit, suggesting that I might want to take a break from my responsibilities there while I focused on personal challenges. The email was kind and supportive, but it was clear that concerns about my stability had reached this organization as well, potentially through Isabella's earlier outrage. The combination of professional pressure, family surveillance, and organizational withdrawal created a sense of being trapped in a situation that was deteriorating despite my continued efforts to maintain professional standards and personal integrity. For the first time, I began to understand how people could be systematically isolated and undermined by coordinated campaigns designed to question their competence and stability. That night, sitting in my small apartment with mounting bills and diminishing prospects, I reached the lowest point of despair I had experienced since the airport incident. The family's initial cruelty had been painful but clear in its boundaries and implications. This sustained campaign of professional and social undermining felt more dangerous because it threatened to destroy the foundations of independence and self-sufficiency that I had been trying to build. I spent hours reviewing my options and trying to identify paths forward that did not require either capitulating to family demands or abandoning the career and community connections I had worked years to establish. Every possibility seemed to involve significant sacrifice or compromise that would validate their characterization of me as unstable and incapable of managing independent adult relationships. The breakthrough came unexpectedly the following morning when I received a phone call from Dr. Patricia Nguyen, the psychologist who had led the boundary-setting workshop I had attended months earlier. Patricia explained that she had been contacted by someone claiming to be concerned about my mental health and professional fitness, but rather than accepting these claims at face value, she had decided to reach out directly to verify my well-being. "Sophia, I want you to know that what is happening to you is not uncommon for people who establish boundaries with dysfunctional family systems," Patricia explained during our conversation. Family members often escalate their efforts to regain control when initial manipulation strategies fail. This does not mean you have made wrong choices, but it does mean you need additional support and strategies for protecting yourself. Patricia's validation that my experience was recognizable and manageable provided the first sense of hope I had felt in weeks. Her professional perspective helped me understand that the coordinated campaign against me was actually evidence that my boundary setting had been effective rather than inappropriate. More importantly, Patricia offered to provide documentation of my mental health stability and professional competence, if needed, to counter any formal challenges to my employment or professional standing. She also connected me with other professionals who had experienced similar family retaliation and had developed successful strategies for maintaining their careers while protecting themselves from ongoing harassment. Through Patricia's network, I learned about legal protections against defamation and harassment that could be applied to family members who were attempting to damage professional reputation. While I hoped to avoid legal action, understanding my options provided a sense of agency that had been missing during the months of feeling powerless against their campaign. Most significantly, Patricia helped me recognize that my isolation and despair were temporary consequences of a transition period, rather than permanent conditions that reflected my actual prospects or capability. The life I had been building was strong enough to survive family interference, but it required patience and strategic thinking, rather than the immediate resolution I had been hoping to achieve. By the end of that conversation, I had begun to see my situation differently. Rather than viewing the family's escalation as evidence that I had made wrong choices, I could understand it as confirmation that they recognized the threat my independence posed to their established patterns of control and manipulation. The woman who had been abandoned at LAX had been someone who sought family approval and acceptance. The woman who was being systematically undermined by family interference was someone who had demonstrated the courage to choose self-respect over toxic relationships. This evolution represented progress rather than failure, even though the current challenges felt overwhelming. Rock bottom had indeed revealed a basement, but it had also provided the solid foundation necessary for building something entirely new. The family's campaign against me was teaching me lessons about resilience and strategic thinking that would serve me well in future challenges. More importantly, it was demonstrating that I was strong enough to survive their worst efforts while maintaining my integrity and professional standards. The descent was nearly complete, but the ascent was about to begin. The connection with Dr. Tricia Nguyen marked the beginning of my emergence from the isolation and despair that had characterized the previous months, though the path forward remained unclear and required careful navigation through unfamiliar territory. Patricia's validation of my experience provided the foundation for rebuilding confidence in my judgment, but translating that validation into practical strategies for moving forward required exploration of opportunities and environments that existed outside my established professional and social network. Patricia recommended that I consider volunteer work in settings completely removed from my usual community connection, suggesting that engaging with populations and organizations that had no knowledge of my family situation would provide both perspective on my challenges and opportunities to rebuild confidence in my capability. She emphasized that meaningful work with people facing genuine hardships often helped individuals recognize the relative nature of their own difficulties, while providing concrete evidence of their ability to create positive impact. Following her suggestion, I began researching volunteer opportunities in areas of Los Angeles that were geographically and socially distant from my usual professional environment. The goal was to find meaningful work that would utilize my skills while providing complete anonymity regarding my personal circumstances and family background. The opportunity that ultimately transformed my perspective came through the most unlikely. While researching volunteer programs online, I discovered the Los Angeles Adult Learning Center, a nonprofit organization that provided basic education services to immigrants and refugees who were working to develop English language skills and complete high school equivalency requirements. The center operated in a converted warehouse in East Los Angeles, serving a population that included recent immigrants, asylum seekers, and long-term residents who had been unable to access traditional educational opportunities. The center's mission resonated with my background in social work, but the population and geographic location ensured that I would be working with people who had no connection to my established professional network or community relationship. The volunteer application process was straightforward and required only basic background verification, rather than the extensive references that might have been problematic given my family's interference with my professional reputation. My initial orientation at the Learning Center introduced me to an environment that was simultaneously challenging and inspiring in ways that differed dramatically from my experience in government social services. The physical space was modest and clearly operating on limited resources, with mismatched furniture, donated computers, and classroom areas separated by portable dividers. However, the energy and determination of both students and staff created an atmosphere of possibility and mutual support that was immediately apparent. The center's director, Carmen Restrepo, was a former teacher who had immigrated from Colombia 20 years earlier, and understood from personal experience the challenges faced by adult learners navigating complex systems while managing work and family responsibility. Carmen's approach to volunteer coordination emphasized matching individual skills with specific program needs, rather than assigning generic tasks, and she quickly recognized that my background in social work and bilingual capabilities could address several ongoing challenges. My initial assignment involved providing individual tutoring support for students who were preparing for the General Educational Development examination, while simultaneously developing English language proficiency.
Many of these students were working multiple jobs and attending classes during evening hours, creating schedules that required flexible and patient instruction approaches. The first student I was assigned to support was Maria Santos, a 34-year-old mother of 3 who had immigrated from Guatemala 8 years earlier. Maria worked as a housekeeper during the day and attended classes 3 evenings per week, with the goal of completing her high school equivalency and eventually pursuing training as a certified nursing assistant. Her determination to advance her education while supporting her family required her to study during lunch breaks, on public transportation, and after her children were asleep. Working with Maria immediately provided perspective on the nature of genuine hardship and the difference between chosen isolation and circumstances imposed by systemic barriers. While I had been struggling with family rejection and professional challenges, Maria was navigating language barriers, economic instability, and educational gaps, while maintaining employment and caring for her children. Her perseverance in pursuing long-term goals despite immediate pressures demonstrated a form of resilience that put my own challenges into context. More importantly, Maria's progress under my tutoring guidance provided concrete evidence that my skills and knowledge could create meaningful impact, even in circumstances where I felt professionally vulnerable. Her improvement in reading comprehension and mathematical problem-solving was measurable and directly attributable to our work together, creating a sense of professional efficacy that had been undermined by months of family interference and institutional doubt. The tutoring relationship also revealed capabilities that I had not previously recognized or developed. Explaining complex concepts to someone with limited English proficiency required creativity and patience that differed from my usual social work practice. Breaking down information into manageable components and finding multiple ways to convey the same ideas helped me develop teaching skills that proved valuable in unexpected contexts. Within 6 weeks of beginning volunteer work at the Learning Center, Carmen approached me about expanding my role to include coordination of services for students who were facing housing instability. Many adult learners were experiencing homelessness or living in overcrowded and temporary situations that interfered with their ability to maintain consistent attendance and focus on educational goals. This expanded role combined my social work background with my new understanding of the immigrant experience and adult education challenges. The position required identifying community resources that could provide emergency assistance while helping students navigate complex application processes for housing support programs. The work was familiar in some respects but required adaptation to serve populations and address needs that differed from my government social services experience. The housing coordination role introduced me to families whose situations were similar to those I had supported in my government position, but whose circumstances were complicated by immigration status, language barriers, and mistrust of official agencies. These additional challenges required creative problem-solving and relationship-building approaches that expanded my professional skills while providing evidence of my ability to adapt and learn in new environments. One family that particularly influenced my developing perspective was the Herrera household, consisting of grandmother Elena, her daughter Rosa, and Rosa's 2 teenage children. The family had been living in their car for 3 weeks after being evicted from an apartment they could no longer afford when Rosa's work hours were reduced. Elena spoke only Spanish and had limited understanding of available social services, while Rosa was working multiple part-time jobs and attending English classes at the Learning Center. Coordinating support for the Herrera family required communication with landlords, social service agencies, and nonprofit organizations, while serving as translator and advocate for family members who were intimidated by complex bureaucratic processes. The work was time-intensive and emotionally demanding, but it provided direct evidence of my ability to create positive outcomes for families facing multiple systemic barriers. The successful placement of the Herrera family in transitional housing marked a turning point in my volunteer work and my understanding of my own capability. The process had required persistence, creativity, and advocacy skills that I had developed through my government work, but had been doubting due to family interference and professional isolation. Seeing the relief and gratitude of family members who were able to sleep in safe housing rather than their car provided validation that was more meaningful than any performance evaluation or professional recognition I had previously received. Carmen Restrepo recognized the effectiveness of my work with both individual students and families facing housing crises, and she began involving me in program planning discussions and grant application processes. The Learning Center was seeking funding to expand services for students with complex social service needs, and my background in both social work and adult education was valuable for developing proposals that demonstrated program impact and sustainability. Working on grant applications provided insight into nonprofit management and fundraising that complemented my social work experience while revealing potential career paths that I had not previously considered. The process of articulating program goals, measuring outcomes, and communicating impact to potential funders required skills that bridge direct service work and organizational leadership. The most significant development during this period was the recognition that my family's interference with my government position had inadvertently created an opportunity to explore work environments and populations that better aligned with my values and interests. The Learning Center's mission-driven culture and immigrant-focused services felt more authentic and meaningful than the bureaucratic constraints and political considerations that had influenced my government work. Patricia Nguyen, who had been providing ongoing support through our monthly check-in conversations, observed that my volunteer work was creating positive changes in my confidence and perspective that extended beyond the immediate benefits of meaningful activity. She noted that engaging with people whose challenges were primarily systemic rather than relational was helping me distinguish between problems that required personal growth and problems that required changes in environment or circumstance. Patricia's observation proved prescient when I began to notice that my approach to family relationships was shifting from defensive reaction to strategic disengagement. Rather than feeling hurt or angry about continued family interference, I was developing the emotional distance necessary to evaluate their behavior as information about their character rather than reflection of my work. This shift became particularly evident when my cousin Andrea contacted me in late summer to report that family members were expressing confusion about my continued absence from family gatherings. According to Andrea, my parents had begun suggesting that my withdrawal was evidence of professional problems or mental health issues that required family intervention. Rather than feeling threatened or defensive about these characterizations, I found myself recognizing them as predictable attempts to maintain control through manufactured concern. The work at the Learning Center had provided sufficient evidence of my competence and stability that family opinions carried less weight in my self-assessment. More importantly, the contrast between the genuine appreciation expressed by Learning Center students and staff and the conditional acceptance offered by family members clarified the difference between authentic relationships and manipulative connection. The immigrant families I was supporting expressed gratitude for assistance without attempting to control my other relationships or decisions. The Learning Center staff valued my contributions without requiring me to modify my personality or priorities to earn continued acceptance. This recognition led to a fundamental shift in how I allocated my time and emotional energy. Rather than spending mental resources on managing family reactions to my choices, I began investing that energy in developing skills and relationships that supported my authentic interests and values. The volunteer work provided concrete evidence that meaningful connections and professional satisfaction were available outside the family-dominated networks that had previously defined my social and professional environment. The impact of this realization extended beyond my immediate circumstances to influence my long-term planning and goal setting. For the first time since the airport incident, I began considering professional possibilities that were based on my genuine interests rather than family expectations or the need to prove my competence to critics. Carmen Restro had begun discussing the possibility of creating a full-time position that would combine housing advocacy with adult education support, pending successful grant funding. The position would utilize my social work background while providing opportunities to develop expertise in immigrant services and nonprofit management. More importantly, it would allow me to work with populations and in an environment where family interference would be irrelevant to my professional effectiveness. The prospect of transitioning from volunteer work to paid employment in a mission-driven organization represented more than a career change. It offered the possibility of building a professional identity that was completely independent of family relationships and community networks that had been compromised by their interference. As autumn approached, I realized that the woman who had been abandoned at LAX airport was being replaced by someone who understood that rejection from the wrong people could create space for acceptance from the right people. The family's cruelty had been intended to diminish my confidence and force my return to their dysfunctional dynamic. Instead, it had created the circumstances necessary for me to discover work that was more meaningful and relationships that were more authentic than anything I had experienced within their limited vision of success and belonging. The smallest places had indeed provided the greatest strength, not through dramatic revelations or profound insights, but through daily evidence that competence, kindness, and determination were recognized and valued by people whose opinions actually matter. The Learning Center had become more than a volunteer opportunity. It had become the foundation for rebuilding a life based on authentic values rather than inherited expectations. The transition from volunteer work to full-time employment at the Los Angeles Adult Learning Center occurred sooner than anticipated, driven by circumstances that revealed both the urgent needs of the immigrant community and my capacity to develop solutions for complex systemic problems. The grant funding that Carmen Restro had been pursuing was approved in early October, creating the immediate need for someone who could design and implement comprehensive support services for adult learners facing multiple barriers to educational success. The position that emerged differed significantly from the housing advocacy role that had been initially discussed. The funding requirements specified the creation of an integrated support program that would address housing stability, employment preparation, financial literacy, and educational achievement through coordinated case management and innovative service delivery approaches. The scope of responsibility required someone with social work expertise, bilingual capabilities, program development experience, and the ability to work independently with minimal supervision. Carmen presented the opportunity during a staff meeting in mid-October, emphasizing that the successful candidate would need to begin work immediately and demonstrate measurable program outcomes within the first 6 months of operation. The timeline was aggressive and the expectations were substantial, but the potential impact on student success and organizational capacity made the position extraordinarily appealing. The application and interview process moved rapidly, facilitated by Carmen's direct knowledge of my capabilities and the urgent need to begin program implementation. Within 2 weeks of the initial announcement, I was offered the position of Director of Student Support Services, with responsibility for developing program protocols, hiring additional staff, and establishing partnerships with community organizations that could provide specialized services. The salary represented a modest increase over my government position, but the autonomy and mission-driven focus of the work provided professional satisfaction that compensated for the limited financial advancement. More importantly, the position offered complete independence from the professional networks and community relationships where my family had been able to create complications and concerns about my competence. My first weeks in the new role involved comprehensive assessment of student needs and available community resources, with the goal of identifying gaps in services and opportunities for innovative approaches to supporting adult learners. The assessment process revealed that traditional social service models were often inadequate for addressing the complex challenges faced by immigrant students who were navigating multiple systems while managing work and family responsibility. The most significant barrier to student success was the lack of coordinated support services that could address interconnected challenges efficiently and effectively. Students were often required to visit multiple agencies, complete redundant application processes, and navigate bureaucratic requirements that consumed time and energy needed for educational pursuit. The result was that many students discontinued their education despite strong motivation and academic capability. The solution that began to emerge from this analysis involved creating a comprehensive support hub within the Learning Center that could provide direct services, coordinate external resources, and advocate for students with other agencies and institutions. The approach required developing partnerships with housing organizations, employment agencies, financial institutions, and social service providers that could deliver services on-site or through streamlined referral process. Implementing this vision required skills and capabilities that extended beyond my social work training and previous experience. The program development process involved grant writing, partnership negotiation, staff recruitment, and service delivery coordination that required strategic thinking and project management abilities I had not previously recognized or developed. The first major innovation that emerged from this process was the creation of mobile service delivery for students who could not access on-site support due to work schedules or transportation limitations. Many Learning Center students worked multiple jobs with irregular hours, making it difficult to attend traditional office hour appointments for housing assistance, employment counseling, or other support service. Working with Maria Santos, the student I had originally tutored,
I developed a pilot program that provided services at students' workplaces during break periods or at community locations that were accessible through public transport. The approach required flexibility and creativity in service delivery but produced significantly higher engagement rates and more successful outcomes than traditional appointment-based service. Maria became an informal partner in program development, providing insights into student perspectives and practical challenges that informed service design decisions. Her experience navigating educational and social service systems while managing employment and family responsibilities provided invaluable guidance for creating approaches that were realistic and sustainable for students facing similar circumstances. The mobile service program attracted attention from other nonprofit organizations and educational institutions that were struggling with similar challenges in serving working adult population. Within 3 months of implementation, I was invited to present the program model at a regional conference on adult education innovation, providing professional recognition that validated both the program's effectiveness and my capabilities as a program developer. The presentation opportunity led to connections with other professionals who were working on similar challenges in different geographic areas and organizational contexts. These connections provided access to research, best practices, and funding opportunities that informed ongoing program development, while establishing my reputation as an innovative practitioner in the field of adult education support service. The most transformative aspect of this period was the recognition that my background in social work, combined with my personal experience navigating family dysfunction and professional challenge, provided unique qualifications for understanding and addressing the complex barriers faced by adult learners. The skills I had developed in managing multiple systems, advocating for clients, and maintaining professional effectiveness despite personal stress were directly applicable to supporting students who were facing similar challenges. This realization led to the development of a specialized component of the support program focused on helping students manage family and community pressures that interfered with educational goals. Many immigrant students faced criticism from family members who viewed education as a luxury that competed with immediate economic needs, creating internal conflicts similar to those I had experienced with my own family. Working with these students required providing both practical support and emotional guidance for navigating relationships with people who did not understand or support their educational aspirations. The counseling and advocacy skills I had developed through my own experience with family rejection proved valuable for helping students maintain their educational commitment, despite social pressure to prioritize short-term economic consideration. Carmen Restrepo recognized the effectiveness of this specialized approach and encouraged me to develop formal curriculum and training materials that could be replicated in other adult education programs. The development process required research into family systems, theory, cultural considerations in immigrant education, and evidence-based approaches to supporting adult learners facing multiple stressors. The curriculum development project provided opportunities to collaborate with university researchers and education policy experts who were studying barriers to adult education completion. These collaborations led to invitations to contribute to academic publications and participate in research studies that examined innovative approaches to supporting non-traditional students. The professional development and recognition that resulted from this work created a sense of career trajectory and potential that differed dramatically from the constrained advancement opportunities available in government social service. The nonprofit sector provided more flexibility for innovation and individual initiative, while the immigrant-focused mission aligned with my personal values and interests in ways that had been missing from my previous work. The program's success also attracted attention from foundation funders and government agencies that were seeking effective models for supporting immigrant integration and adult education completion. By the end of my first year in the position, the Learning Center had received additional grant funding to expand the support program and develop training materials for other organizations seeking to implement similar approaches. The expansion process required hiring additional staff members and developing supervisory and management capabilities that represented significant professional growth. The staff recruitment process provided opportunities to identify professionals who shared the program's mission-driven approach, while bringing diverse expertise in areas such as employment counseling, financial planning, and mental health support. Managing a team of professionals with varied backgrounds and specializations required leadership skills that I had not previously developed, but discovered through practical application and mentorship from Carmen Rest. The experience of coordinating multiple staff members while maintaining program quality and student outcomes provided evidence of management capabilities that opened additional career possibilities. The most rewarding aspect of program expansion was the opportunity to support staff members who, like myself, had experienced professional challenges or family difficulties that had limited their career opportunities. Several of the counselors and advocates hired for the program were immigrants themselves who had faced educational and employment barriers similar to those experienced by our student population. Creating an inclusive and supportive work environment for staff members who had overcome significant challenges required applying the same principles of respect and empowerment that guided our work with students. The result was a team culture that emphasized mutual support, shared learning, and commitment to program mission, rather than hierarchical authority or competitive individual achievement. The success of this management approach attracted additional attention from organizational development consultants and nonprofit management training programs that were studying effective leadership practices in mission-driven organizations. I was invited to participate in several professional development programs that provided training in advanced management techniques while connecting me with leaders from other successful nonprofit organizations. These professional development opportunities provided access to networks and resources that were completely independent of my family's influence or community connection. The relationships I developed with other nonprofit leaders were based solely on professional competence and shared commitment to social justice rather than family relationships or social obligation. The contrast between these authentic professional relationships and the manipulative family dynamics I had experienced was profound and clarifying. Working with colleagues who valued innovation, supported professional growth, and respected individual contributions created a work environment that felt fundamentally different from any previous experience. By the end of my first year as Director of Student Support Services, the program had achieved measurable outcomes that exceeded grant requirements and organizational Student retention rates had improved significantly, housing stability had increased among program participants, and employment outcomes had shown consistent, positive trends. More importantly, student feedback indicated high levels of satisfaction with service quality and accessibility. The program's success led to recognition from the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs and an invitation to serve on a citywide task force examining barriers to immigrant integration and economic mobility. The appointment provided access to policy development processes and high-level community leadership that represented significant professional advance. The task force appointment also created opportunities to influence policy decisions that affected the populations I served while demonstrating expertise in areas that were increasingly important to municipal and state government priorities. The experience of participating in policy development discussions provided insights into governmental decision-making processes while building relationships with elected officials and senior administrators. The most significant personal revelation during this period was the recognition that the skills and perspectives I had developed through my experience with family rejection and professional challenges had created capabilities that were valuable and unique. The resilience, independence, and authentic relationship-building abilities that had emerged from navigating those difficulties were directly applicable to supporting others facing similar challenges. This understanding transformed my perspective on the airport incident and subsequent family interference from sources of pain and limitation to experiences that had contributed to my professional development and personal growth. The abandonment that had initially felt like rejection had actually been liberation from relationships and expectations that would have prevented me from discovering my authentic capabilities and interests. The woman who stood in LAX Terminal 4 holding a boarding pass for a flight that had already departed had been someone who sought validation from people who were fundamentally unable to provide it. The woman who was now directing innovative programs and influencing policy development had learned to create value through service to others rather than seeking approval from those who could not recognize her work. Necessity had indeed become innovation, not through dramatic inspiration or sudden insight, but through persistent application of skills and values to address real problems faced by real people. The family's attempt to diminish my confidence had inadvertently created the circumstances necessary for me to discover capabilities and opportunities that exceeded anything they could have imagined or supported. The recognition that emerged from my work at the Los Angeles Adult Learning Center brought unexpected visibility that required careful navigation of public attention and media interest. The innovative support programs had attracted notice from education researchers, policymakers, and community leaders, but the increased visibility also created potential vulnerabilities regarding my family's situation and the professional challenges I had previously experienced. The catalyst for this new phase of public attention was an invitation to present the Mobile Service Delivery Program at the National Conference on Adult Education Innovation in San Francisco. The conference represented the most prestigious gathering of professionals in the field, and the presentation opportunity indicated that my work had achieved national recognition among education experts and policy researchers. Preparing for the conference presentation required comprehensive documentation of program outcomes, analysis of implementation challenges, and development of recommendations for other organizations seeking to replicate similar approaches. The preparation process provided opportunities to demonstrate the scholarly and analytical capabilities that complemented my practical program development experience. The presentation itself was well received by conference attendees, generating significant interest from education directors, foundation program officers, and university researchers who were studying barriers to adult education completion. The positive response led to multiple requests for consultation services, collaboration opportunities, and media interviews that extended well beyond the immediate conference setting. The most significant outcome of the conference presentation was an interview request from Elena Vasquez, an education reporter for the Los Angeles Times, who was developing a feature story about innovative approaches to supporting immigrant education and integration. Elena had attended my presentation and was particularly interested in the connection between my program's effectiveness and my personal understanding of the challenges faced by people navigating complex family and professional pressure. The interview request created a decision point that required careful consideration of the potential benefits and risks associated with media exposure. The opportunity to highlight the Learning Center's work and advocate for increased support for adult education programs was appealing and aligned with my professional goals. However, the interview process would inevitably involve questions about my background and qualifications that could lead to discussion of my family situation and the circumstances that had led to my current position. Patricia Nguyen, who continued to provide periodic consultation and support, helped me evaluate the decision by examining both the potential positive outcomes and the possible complications that could result from increased public visibility. Patricia emphasized that media attention often involved loss of control over narrative development and message delivery, requiring careful preparation and clear boundaries about which aspects of personal experience were appropriate for public discussion.
After extensive consideration and consultation, I decided to participate in the interview while establishing clear parameters about the focus and scope of the discussion. I prepared talking points that emphasized the program's development and outcomes while providing sufficient personal context to explain my qualifications and motivation without revealing details about family dysfunction or professional interference. The interview with Elena Vasquez took place at the Learning Center during an evening when adult education classes were in session, providing opportunities to observe the program in operation and speak with students about their experiences. Elena demonstrated genuine interest in understanding both the practical aspects of service delivery and the underlying philosophy that guided program development. The conversation revealed Elena's sophisticated understanding of immigration policy, adult education challenges, and nonprofit program management, indicating that the resulting article would likely provide substantive analysis rather than superficial coverage. Her questions about my background were appropriately focused on professional qualifications and educational preparation, rather than personal circumstances or family relationships. During the interview, I emphasized that my understanding of the challenges faced by adult learners had been informed by both professional training and personal experience navigating systems that were not designed to support individual success. I explained that my own experience with institutional barriers and social pressures had provided insights into the importance of comprehensive support services and flexible service delivery approaches. Elena's follow-up questions demonstrated her recognition that personal experience could enhance rather than compromise professional competence, particularly in fields focused on supporting people facing systemic challenges. Her approach to the interview suggested that the resulting article would position personal experience as a professional asset rather than a limitation or source of concern. The article appeared in the Sunday edition of the Los Angeles Times 3 weeks after the interview, featuring a comprehensive analysis of barriers to immigrant integration and highlighting several innovative programs that were addressing these challenges effectively. The coverage of my work at the Learning Center was extensive and overwhelmingly positive, emphasizing both program outcomes and the unique approach to service delivery that had emerged from understanding client perspectives through personal experience. The article's publication generated immediate and substantial response from multiple constituencies. Education professionals contacted the Learning Center seeking consultation and training opportunities. Foundation program officers expressed interest in funding similar programs in other geographic areas. University researchers requested collaboration on studies examining effective approaches to supporting non-traditional students. The most significant response came from the California Department of Education, which issued an invitation to participate in a statewide task force examining barriers to adult education completion and developing recommendations for improving support services. The appointment represented recognition at the state policy level and created opportunities to influence decisions affecting thousands of adult learners throughout California. However, the increased visibility also attracted attention from less welcome sources. Within days of the article's publication, I received multiple messages from family members who had apparently been monitoring my professional activities and were concerned about the public recognition I was receiving. My mother's initial response was a voicemail message expressing surprise about the newspaper article and suggesting that she had not been aware of my career transition or professional success. Her tone conveyed a mixture of pride and concern, indicating that she was pleased about the positive recognition, while worried about the implications of my continued independence from family relationships. Isabella's response was more direct and revealed the underlying family dynamics that had motivated their previous interference with my professional reputation. She sent a text message stating that the family was confused about why I had not informed them about my new position, and questioning whether the media attention was appropriate, given my previous problems with professional relationships. The most telling response came from my father, who called directly and expressed concern that the media attention might create unrealistic expectations about my capabilities and lead to future disappointment. His suggestion that I should be cautious about accepting too much responsibility or visibility revealed his continued belief that I was fundamentally unsuited for leadership roles or public recognition. These family responses confirmed that their understanding of my capabilities and potential remained limited by their previous characterizations of me as unstable and unsuitable for independent success. The evidence of my professional achievements and public recognition had not modified their fundamental assessment of my competence or worthiness for respect and support. More importantly, their responses revealed that they were continuing to monitor my professional activities and were concerned about my success rather than pleased by it. The attention I was receiving challenged their narrative about my limitations and created discomfort rather than celebration within the family system. Patricia Nguyen helped me understand that this pattern of response was typical for dysfunctional family systems that relied on maintaining specific roles and hierarchies among family members. My success threatened the established dynamic by demonstrating capabilities that contradicted their characterization of me as dependent and unsuccessful. Patricia's analysis helped me recognize that any attempt to share my professional success with family members or seek their validation would likely result in efforts to minimize my achievements or create complications that would interfere with continued success. The healthiest approach was to maintain the boundaries I had established while continuing to focus on the work and relationships that supported my authentic development. The decision to maintain these boundaries was tested when my cousin Andrea contacted me to suggest that the family was hurt by my continued distance and would welcome the opportunity to reconcile and celebrate my professional success. Andrea's message implied that my achievements had demonstrated my competence and that family relationships could now be rebuilt on a more respectful foundation. While Andrea's intentions appeared genuine, her suggestion that reconciliation was now possible because I had proven my worth revealed the conditional nature of family acceptance. The implication that my value as a family member was dependent on external validation contradicted the principles of unconditional support and respect that characterized healthy relationships. More concerning was Andrea's revelation that family members had been discussing strategies for reestablishing contact and rebuilding relationships now that I had achieved recognizable success. The calculated nature of this timing suggested that their interest in reconciliation was motivated by desire to benefit from my professional recognition, rather than genuine regret about their previous treatment. The media attention had also attracted interest from my former colleagues at the Department of Social Services, several of whom contacted me to express admiration for my career transition and program development success. These contacts provided opportunities to rebuild professional relationships that had been damaged by family interference while demonstrating that my reputation within the social services community had been restored through evidence of continued competence and innovation. Maria Elena, my former supervisor, contacted me to suggest that the department would be interested in consulting with me about implementing similar support programs for their clients. Her outreach indicated that any concerns about my professional stability had been resolved by observation of my continued success and positive media coverage. The contrast between these supportive professional contacts and the complicated family responses highlighted the difference between relationships based on mutual respect and those based on control and manipulation. The colleagues who had witnessed my work ethic and professional competence were pleased by my success and interested in learning from my experience. The family members who had questioned my capabilities were uncomfortable with my independence and seeking ways to reestablish their influence. The most significant challenge during this period was managing the increased demands on my time and attention, while maintaining focus on the core mission of supporting adult learners. The consultation requests, speaking opportunities, and collaboration invitations were professionally rewarding but required careful evaluation to ensure they enhanced rather than distracted from my primary responsibility. Carmen Restrepo provided valuable guidance in navigating these opportunities by emphasizing the importance of selecting engagements that advanced the Learning Center's mission, while building my professional expertise. Her mentorship helped me develop criteria for evaluating external opportunities based on their potential to create positive impact rather than simply provide personal recognition or career advancement. The speaking engagements and consultation work that I accepted during this period provided opportunities to advocate for increased funding and policy support for adult education, while building relationships with other professionals who shared similar values and goals. These activities created a network of authentic professional relationships that was entirely independent of family connections or community relationships that had been compromised by previous interference. The most rewarding aspect of this increased visibility was the opportunity to provide hope and inspiration for other professionals who had experienced family rejection or professional setback. Several colleagues shared their own stories of overcoming family dysfunction or workplace challenges, creating connections based on shared experience and mutual support. These relationships provided evidence that my experience with family abandonment and professional interference was not unique or indicative of personal inadequacy. Many successful professionals had navigated similar challenges and had used those experiences to develop resilience, empathy, and innovative approaches to their work. By the end of this period, I had established a public professional identity that was based on demonstrable achievements and recognized expertise rather than family connections or inherited social status. The media coverage and professional recognition had created a narrative about my capabilities and contributions
that was entirely separate from family characterizations or community gossip. The woman who had been abandoned at LAX airport had been someone whose identity was defined by family relationships and whose self-worth depended on external validation. The woman who was now speaking at national conferences and influencing state policy had learned to define herself through her contributions to others and to find validation through meaningful work rather than social approval. Owning my story before others could write it had required courage to be vulnerable about challenges while emphasizing strengths and achievement. The process had demonstrated that authentic success could not be diminished by family rejection, and that professional recognition, based on genuine competence, provided more satisfaction than acceptance based on conformity to others' expectations. The validation that emerged during the months following my increased public recognition extended far beyond professional acknowledgement to encompass institutional vindication of the principles and decisions that had guided my response to family dysfunction and workplace challenge. The recognition I received was not merely personal achievement, but confirmation that the values I had maintained despite significant pressure and criticism represented sound judgment and authentic leadership, rather than stubborn resistance to legitimate authority. The most significant validation came through an unexpected source when the California Department of Education announced its selection of the Los Angeles Adult Learning Center as a model site for statewide replication of innovative support service. The designation carried substantial prestige within the education community and included significant funding for program expansion and technical assistance to other organizations seeking to implement similar approaches. The selection process had involved comprehensive evaluation of program outcomes, cost-effectiveness analysis, and assessment of sustainability factors across dozens of potential sites throughout the state. The Learning Center's designation as the premier model indicated that the approaches I had developed represented best practices worthy of systematic implementation, rather than interesting experiments with limited applicability. Sarah Chen, the state education department official who led the evaluation process, contacted me directly to discuss the technical assistance component of the model site designation. During our conversation, she emphasized that the evaluation team had been particularly impressed by the integration of direct service delivery with advocacy and systems change efforts that characterized our program approach. According to Chen, traditional adult education support programs typically focused on addressing individual barriers without examining the systemic factors that created those barriers in the first place. The approach I had developed recognized that sustainable outcomes required both individual support and institutional change, creating programs that simultaneously served students while advocating for policy and system modifications that would benefit future learners. This analysis provided external validation of the strategic thinking that had guided my program development decision. The integration of individual service with systems advocacy had emerged from my personal experience navigating institutional barriers and recognizing that individual resilience was insufficient to address systemic dysfunction. The state education department's recognition of this approach confirmed that my experience had produced insights that were valuable beyond my immediate circumstance. The model site designation also attracted attention from the Federal Department of Education, which was developing new guidelines for adult education funding that emphasized innovative approaches to supporting non-traditional students. The Learning Center was invited to participate in a national pilot program that would test and refine approaches for serving adult learners facing multiple barriers to educational completion. The federal involvement provided opportunities to influence policy development at the national level, while accessing resources and research support that could enhance program effectiveness and sustainability. The invitation represented recognition that the work I had developed was contributing to national conversations about adult education, rather than simply addressing local challenges. More personally significant was the validation that emerged from observing the long-term outcomes of students who had participated in the support programs during the initial implementation period. Maria Santos, who had been among the first students I tutored and had provided ongoing input into program development, successfully completed her certified nursing assistant training and secured employment at a local hospital with benefits and advancement opportunity. Maria's success represented more than individual achievement. Her experience demonstrated that comprehensive support services could enable adult learners to achieve educational goals that had previously seemed unattainable due to systemic barriers and family pressure. Her outcome validated the program model while providing concrete evidence that the approaches I had developed created measurable positive impact on people's lives. The validation extended beyond program outcomes to encompass recognition of the leadership and management capabilities I had developed through necessity and practical application. Carmen Restrepo, who had provided mentorship during my transition into nonprofit management, was promoted to a regional leadership position within the network of adult education centers, creating an opportunity for me to assume greater organizational responsibility.
The promotion discussion that followed Carmen's advancement provided external assessment of my management effectiveness and organizational leadership potential. The Learning Center's Board of Directors conducted a comprehensive evaluation of my performance that included input from staff members, community partners, and student representatives, creating a thorough assessment of my capabilities across multiple dimensions of organizational leadership. The board's decision to offer me the position of executive director represented institutional confidence in my ability to lead organizational growth while maintaining program quality and mission focus. The promotion indicated that the leadership skills I had developed through managing complex programs and diverse staff teams were recognized as transferable to broader organizational responsibility. The transition to executive leadership occurred during a period of significant organizational expansion, as the Learning Center prepared to implement the model site designation and provide technical assistance to other organizations. The increased responsibility required developing skills in strategic planning, financial management, and board relations that represented substantial professional growth beyond my previous experience. The most challenging aspect of this transition was managing the tension between increased administrative responsibilities and continued direct involvement in program development and service delivery. The executive role required spending more time on organizational management and external relations, while maintaining connection to the mission-driven work that had motivated my initial involvement with the Learning Center. The solution that emerged involved developing a management approach that emphasized distributed leadership and collaborative decision-making, rather than hierarchical control and individual authority. This approach allowed me to maintain involvement in program development, while empowering other staff members to assume greater responsibility for day-to-day operations and service delivery. The management philosophy I developed was directly informed by my experience with dysfunctional family dynamics and manipulative workplace relationships. The Learning Center's organizational culture emphasized transparency, mutual respect, and shared commitment to mission rather than power hierarchies or competitive individual advancement. This approach created a work environment that supported both individual professional growth and collective achievement of organizational goals. The effectiveness of this management approach was recognized by other nonprofit organizations and management training programs that were studying successful models for mission-driven leadership. I was invited to present workshops on collaborative management approaches at several professional conferences, providing opportunities to share insights about creating supportive organizational cultures while building my reputation as a thoughtful organizational leader. These speaking opportunities provided platforms for discussing the connection between personal experience and professional effectiveness that went beyond the specific context of immigrant education and adult learning. The presentations examined how individuals who had overcome family dysfunction and workplace challenges often developed leadership capabilities that were valuable in mission-driven organizations. The most significant aspect of this recognition was the validation of my decision to prioritize authentic relationships and meaningful work over family approval and social conformity. The success I had achieved was directly attributable to my willingness to establish boundaries with toxic relationships and invest my energy in activities that aligned with my values, rather than meeting others' expectations. This validation was particularly meaningful given the criticism and interference I had experienced from family members who had characterized my decisions as evidence of poor judgment and emotional instability. The external recognition of my leadership capabilities and professional achievements provided objective evidence that my choices had been sound rather than misguided. The vindication extended to the specific incident that had initiated my journey toward independence and authentic success. The airport abandonment that my family had intended as humiliation and control had actually created the circumstances necessary for me to discover capabilities and opportunities that would not have been available if I had remained dependent on their approval and support. The contrast between my current professional standing and my family's continued dysfunction became apparent when my cousin Andrea contacted me again to report that my parents were experiencing significant financial difficulties related to my father's construction business. According to Andrea, the business had been struggling with cash flow problems and client relations issues that were affecting the family's financial stability and social standing within their community. Andrea's report indicated that my father's management approach and business practices had created problems with contractors, suppliers, and clients that were damaging the company's reputation and profitability. The difficulties appeared to be related to the same authoritarian and manipulative interpersonal style that had characterized his family relationships, suggesting that his approach to business relationships was similarly dysfunctional. The irony of this situation was profound, given my father's previous criticism of my career choices and his suggestion that my problems with family relationships indicated fundamental character flaws that would limit my professional success. The evidence now suggested that his own interpersonal difficulties were creating problems in his business, while my ability to build collaborative relationships had become a foundation for professional recognition and organizational effectiveness. More significantly, Andrea reported that my family members had been discussing the possibility of seeking my assistance with their financial difficulties, either through direct support or by leveraging my professional connections and reputation to help stabilize my father's business. The suggestion that they might ask for my help represented a complete reversal of their previous characterization of me as someone who needed their guidance and support. The request for assistance, if it materialized, would create an opportunity to demonstrate the principles and boundaries I had established during my journey toward independence. The decision about whether to provide support would need to be based on clear assessment of their willingness to acknowledge their previous behavior and commit to respectful relationships, rather than manipulation and control. Dr. Patricia, who continued to provide periodic consultation during significant decision points, helped me prepare for the possibility of renewed family contact by examining my current emotional relationship to their approval and my capacity to maintain appropriate boundaries, regardless of their circumstances or Patricia's assessment indicated that my emotional independence from family validation had developed sufficiently to allow me to interact with them without compromising my principles or professional focus. The success I had achieved provided a foundation of self-worth that was independent of their opinions or treatment, creating the possibility for interactions based on clear boundaries rather than desperate attempts to earn acceptance. The most important recognition during this period was my own understanding of the transformation that had occurred in my identity and self-perception. The woman who had been abandoned at LAX airport had been someone whose sense of worth was dependent on family approval and whose professional confidence could be undermined by their criticism and interference. The woman who was now leading organizational expansion and influencing policy development had learned to derive satisfaction from meaningful contributions rather than external validation. The skills I had developed through necessity had become capabilities that were recognized and valued by institutions and colleagues whose opinions were based on professional competence rather than social expectation. The vindication was complete not because my family had acknowledged their mistakes or apologized for their behavior, but because I had built a life and career that demonstrated their assessment of my capabilities had been fundamentally incorrect. The truth about my potential had emerged through persistent application of my values rather than through their recognition or acceptance. The journey from abandonment to vindication had required courage to maintain principles despite pressure, wisdom to recognize the difference between authentic and manipulative relationships, and persistence to continue building meaningful work despite obstacles and criticism. The vindication that emerged was not revenge against those who had doubted me, but rather evidence that authentic success was possible for those willing to prioritize values over validation and contribution over conformity. The professional recognition and institutional validation that had emerged from my work at the Los Angeles Adult Learning Center created opportunities for advancement that required fundamental decisions about career trajectory and personal priority. The success of the model site designation and my promotion to executive director had attracted attention from national organizations and government agencies that were seeking experienced leaders for positions with significantly broader scope and influence than my current role. The most compelling opportunity arose through Dr. Sarah Chen, the state education official who had led the evaluation process that designated our learning center as a model site. Chen contacted me in late spring to discuss a position with the Federal Department of Education that involved developing and implementing national policy initiatives for adult education and workforce development programs serving immigrant and refugee populations. The federal position represented a substantial advancement in both responsibility and potential impact. The role would involve coordinating policy development across multiple agencies, managing relationships with congressional staff and advocacy organizations, and overseeing implementation of programs affecting hundreds of thousands of adult learners throughout the United States. The opportunity to influence policy at the national level aligned with the systems change focus that had characterized my approach to program development at the Learning Center. The position also offered significant personal and professional benefits, including a substantial salary increase, comprehensive benefits, and opportunities for international travel and collaboration with education experts from other countries. The Washington, D.C. location would provide access to professional networks and career advancement possibilities that were unavailable in Los Angeles, while positioning me for potential leadership roles in federal agencies or major nonprofit organizations. However, accepting the federal position would require leaving the Learning Center during a critical period of expansion and program development. The model site designation had created opportunities for organizational growth and community impact that were just beginning to be realized. The technical assistance component of the designation required sustained leadership and program expertise that would be difficult to replace during the transition period. More significantly, the federal position would require relocating to Washington, D.C. and establishing a new professional, personal life in an environment that was completely disconnected from the community relationships and mission-driven work that had provided meaning and purpose during my recovery from family dysfunction. The change would represent a fundamental shift from direct service and community engagement to policy development and institutional coordination. The decision became more complex when Carmen Restrepo, who had been promoted to regional leadership and had become a trusted mentor and colleague, expressed strong reservations about my potential departure from the Learning Center. Carmen emphasized that the federal position, while prestigious and well compensated, would remove me from the direct service work that had motivated my initial involvement in adult education and had informed the innovative approaches that were now being recognized and replicated. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from